Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we'll be going over the biggest changes that can be found in the new Dystopian Wars version 3.3 that was released yesterday by Warcradle Studios. The core set was updated and there are some pretty big changes that are really going to have a big impact on how you play the game. Now, there are more than just 7 changes in this rulebook, of course, and I do recommend that you go through it and try and discover all of the different ones, but I decided to do multiple videos about it, one with all of the big changes that are very obviously going to change the way you play, but also have a video dedicated to some of the more subtle tweaks that are still going to have an impact on your gameplay, but are maybe not quite as obvious as before. So if you're interested in that video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for that future update as well. At number 7, I have the assault rework that they did. In the previous version of the games, you could pretty much one-shot almost any ship out there if you just threw a big enough assault at it, and that is pretty much gone. You can no longer do unlimited amounts of damage because the damage is capped. So that means that you're not just going to be able to cross the board with any ship and just take something clean off. The worst result for the enemy that you can now inflict with an assault is one where you cause 1 critical and 2 catastrophic hits onto a ship. Now the way this now works means that you can do a maximum of 9 damage onto an enemy ship if it was already at a chaos and disarray state, because technically that 1 critical hit could be a duplicate critical hit, resulting into 3 catastrophic hits, causing 6 damage, 2 per catastrophic hit, and 3 disorder, which could technically lead to an extra point of damage if the target was already at a full chaos and disarray. So it's still a very powerful tool, you're still going to be able to do lots of damage with it, but it's now more of a tool to finish off enemy ships that have already been damaged and not so much one to just bank on to take something off in one go. The other big new change at number 6 is the fact that terrain and table size have now been reworked, and I'm sort of bundling this one as well together with how reserves work in this game. For starters, the table size is now actually a 6 foot by 4 foot if you're playing any battles above 1000 points. Games that are below 1000 points are still being fought on the traditional 4x4 table that you probably have been using before. And a new change to this is the amount of terrain that you should have on the board is now quantified. Now it's of course a suggestion, but it's being said that this is pretty much what the game is being balanced around. And it's described as having mass 7 on each 24-inch board square. Now that means that you can do this in multiple ways. You can create one enormous piece of terrain that would be larger than the Ice Maiden, which is a ship at mass 6, to represent your mass 7 land. Or you can have 2 islands of mass 3 together with a small mass 1 island as well. They have a very handy little iceberg table on their website that you can use as a reference, and of course you can always reference to other ships to sort of give you an indication of how large your terrain is mass-wise. And I'm not going to go through too many details, but there is a more detailed description of what each type of terrain does and what the different in-game effects are. And coupled with this, there's also been a rework of how reserves work. In the previous version you had to put an entire battle fleet in reserves if you wanted to use that rule. That's no longer the case. You can do it on a unit by unit basis, although the manner in which they arrive is still pretty much the same. However, one important note, and why I discuss these two together, with the rework of the terrain, you're going to be fighting over a lot more packedly denser terrain as well than most people were, meaning unexpected arrival is going to be slightly more restricted to where you can just appear. You gotta remember, you're only allowed to appear 3 inch outside of any terrain piece, so some of those larger models, such as the Murmansk for instance, are gonna have a slightly harder time finding a spot on the table where they can just pop out without being within 3 inches of a piece of terrain. Another major change at number 5 is also the redesign of how critical hits, catastrophic hits and disorder work. Now first off the bat, critical hits no longer cause disorder, so it's going to be a lot more difficult to get a ship to chaos and disarray, where you're going to have multiple points of damage stacking because you're already taking disorder when you're at chaos and disarray. However, if you're causing a catastrophic damage, traditionally this is done by hitting the citadel twice with a hit, it will still put a critical hit marker on the target, which I think is a very good change. It made no sense to me that suddenly that critical damage marker would not be applied when it was just too bad to cause a catastrophic hit. So those two results are now sort of rolled into one. Mind you, if you roll a duplicate critical hit, you will still be causing a catastrophic hit just like you did before, so that hasn't changed. And there's a new benefit to having catastrophic hits as well. If you score a catastrophic hit on the target, you will also destroy one of the escort tokens that the target has, if it had any, of course. And speaking of escorts, one of the bigger changes at number 4 is the redesign of escorts and corvettes. Corvettes as a type of escort no longer exist. They are all just called escorts from now on, and they are no longer playable models technically. They are just tokens that you place around a ship and a unit that follow them along and provide them with certain benefits. You can no longer just target those and blow them off with a plucky little rocket battery somewhere and just cause your opponents to lose, 10-15 points in a single shot. Corvettes do still exist as Mass 1 ships. They're a type of Mass 1 ship, like there are frigates, corvettes, destroyers, that sort of thing. But they are no longer used as this sort of token that you tag onto anything. However, what previously was known as a corvette was something that not only provided defense, but also provided some extra oomph to any assaults being made by a ship. And now escorts provide all of those benefits and some more. They provide you with an extra point of SDV or ADV, one of the extra dice I should say, an extra dice to any assault being made by the ship that has any escort, but also, and I think this is the big one, you also get +1 dice to 1 point blank attack action from the main ship. So, for instance, if I take something with a heavy broadside and I have a ship with 4 escorts, that big flagship can be making a 14 dice fusillade attack with those broadsides. That's a very powerful addition that you can now do with these escorts as well. And in general, they're not as expensive anymore when looking at the ORBATS, so I'm pretty sure we'll be seeing more of those in the near future. Why? Because they're also pretty hard to remove now. They can only be removed when you're suffering catastrophic hits, like we described earlier, or if your ship is being swarmed by SRS, more on which later. Before we discuss the SRS, the thing that I think is the third biggest change in this new edition is the repair phase change. The repair phase is still there, it's still part of the end game, but it doesn't work like it did before. Now, ships repair at the end of their activation. So, at the end of the activation, you can still repair in the traditional way. You roll a number of dice equal to the mass, and then you're trying to fish for blues. However, the repairs are made harder. You can only remove 1 marker or 1 disorder level per counter or heavy counter dice you threw. So for instance, if you get 3 dice, because it's a mass 3 ship, and you roll 1 counter and 1 heavy counter, you're only allowed to remove 2 effects or 2 levels of disorder, because you threw 2 blue dice, so to speak. Now, there's still repairs in the end phase, like I mentioned, but that is now reserved for jury-rigged repairs. And what are jury-rigged repairs? Where they're a sort of a last-ditch effort for a crew to try and get rid of a few tokens or disorder levels. But that comes at the chance of losing a hull point when you do so. The mechanism is rather simple. If you've got a token, let's say a navigation lock, that's going to cause you to just slam into a mountain if you're not careful, well, you can say like, I want to jury rig that navigation lock. What you then do is throw one dice. If you throw a blank, you're sort of out of luck, because that means that the token is not repaired and you're suffering a hull point of damage. You could, by contrast, be extremely lucky by rolling a critical hit, and then you remove the token and you don't even lose a hull point. However, anything else, not a blank, not an exploding result, is going to remove the token, but at the expense of a hull point. So think of the end phase more as a, oh, I really have to get rid of this effect and I don't have any valor cards for it. Speaking of valor cards, the second biggest change, I think, are new valor effects. You can now use your valor cards in different ways than you could before. You can still use them by wanting the valor effect described on the card itself, of course, like you always could. But now they can actually be used for different effects that are not mentioned on the card, but on the unit itself. You use the card, but you only really use it for the initiative value that it has, because the effect will be noted on the unit card itself of the unit that is using the valor effect. And that initiative value can be used to counter it through abilities like Fortunes of War, or some abilities that are just so strong that they innately allow you to try and counter them even if you don't have any units and have a rule to counter them. And I've included a small example of this one in the top right corner here. This is the Blitzschlag valor effect. It can be made by the Hochmeister unit from the Imperium. And what does it do? Well, once per activation, this unit can make the following action as a valor effect, as a temporary power-up in other words. Any model with this rule that has caused at least 1 point of damage in a ramming action this activation may make a second ramming action. That is very, very strong. Those Blitzschlag swords that they carry are now ramming 12 weapons, and they can just, if they get to do that a second time, that might as well just be the end of your ship. So it's a very strong ability. However, the rule continues, the opponent may always attempt to cancel this valor effect, and it does not require an initial rule to be able to do so. So let's say I have a valor card with an initiative value of 32 in my hand. Well, I play that one to use the Blitzschlag as the Imperium player. My opponent can go, I would rather you didn't, and can discard cards until he reaches that, or rather exceeds that initiative value of 32. For instance, if my opponent chucked a card with a value of 23 and a card with 17 as a value at it, he would reach 40, which is enough to counter the 32 valor effect that I played, and then it would be cancelled and it just doesn't go through. That's how the new valor system works, and I think it's going to be great because the cards were not quite used as often, and you're going to see a lot more of them in your future games. By far the biggest change though, and I have this one at number 1, are the way that SRS have been reworked. Now, I had made a video, and some of the veterans of the channel may have seen it already, about some of my thoughts about the SRS tokens and the limitations that they had, and why I didn't think they were in that healthy of a spot in the game. And the funny thing is, this was actually being worked on for this version of the game. One of the major complaints I had back in that video was the fact that SRS used to have range issues. That's now gone. You used to only be able to launch them at 20 inch during the special operations step, but has now been bumped up to 40 inch, meaning that they now operate more as long range units compared to anything else. The downside is though, there's no more long range sortie, so you cannot resort to having an unlimited range on them. However, if you're able to launch within 40 inch, that's not going to be something that you want to do all that often anyway, or that you would have wanted to do in the first place. Combat Air Patrol has also been reworked in this way. You can just use it without any downside this time. And you might go like, well, without any downsides, that's really, really strong. But I like that this was changed. It would be incredibly gamey if somebody deployed an aircraft carrier and a cunning opponent deployed their ship just outside 40, like at 40.5-inch range from that one, meaning it was completely immune to any of the SRS tokens from that carrier. So I'm very happy to see that Combat Air Patrol is still there. They give you unlimited range in the first round to sort of counteract any of these gamey deployment options, if you will. One of the things I also mentioned was that SRS were not that strong at the end of the day because they only threw 2 dice per token. That's been buffed to 3 dice, so that's a significant increase in the amount of damage they'll be doing on the attack run. And another big change to it is the way that you intercept them. Any ship can try an interception. The SRS themselves are no longer aerial attacks, but you do use your aerial defense to shoot down SRS tokens before they attack. You throw your ADV pool that you would have had against any aerial weapon, but you get to remove 1 enemy SRS token per 3 counters that you throw. So for instance, you get 9 defense in aerial, you throw 4 counters, that means you get to remove 1 SRS token, 1 per 3. If you had thrown 6 counters, you would have gotten to remove 2 tokens. It's fairly simple. And what do friendly tokens do now? Friendly tokens on the target of an attack run add 3 extra ADV dice to that pool. And you can use that same +3 ADV or even SDV at any time during the activation, but you then must discard that SRS token like you would in the previous edition. Also, there is a new rule that states that if you have more tokens than twice the mass of the target, you get to re-roll all of your blanks in that attack run. And, like I mentioned with the escorts, that means that you're swarming your opponent and one of the escorts is going to be going away, it's going to be removed, because those escorts are the poor suckers who have to jump in between those SRS tokens and the flagship, and they're just not gonna make it if you swarm them with enough of them. And a big important thing, this is not necessarily a core rule change, but there are way more options in ORBATS that allow you to shoot down SRS tokens before they even attack. So there is a lot more interactivity with these tokens than ever before, which really gets the thumbs up for me. There you have it. Those were the 7 biggest changes, in my opinion, of the new rules. If you don't agree with me, or you have another change that you thought like, oh, I think this one is worth mentioning as well, make sure you leave it down in the comments. I'd be very happy to hear what you think of this new edition. I can't wait to give it a go. I can't wait to give it a go, rather. And I do hope to see you in the next ones, because we do have a lot more content coming up about the new ORBATS, and not to forget those small, subtle changes that the rules have as well. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.